More than 1,000 points on the basketball court, a place in the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, 15 years at ESPN, and a trusted seat on Good Morning America made Robin Roberts seem almost unshakable. America saw the smile, the discipline, the calm voice that could carry a difficult morning without breaking. But the real test of Robin's life did not come under studio lights. It came behind a hospital door, where the former college athlete faced breast cancer, then myelodysplastic syndrome, then a bone marrow transplant from her sister Sally Ann, while her mother's voice was becoming only a memory. Later, the woman who had once been cared for would sit in another waiting room as Amber Lane faced breast cancer too. If Robin's courage or familiar morning voice has ever meant something to you, give this video a like as a small tribute and subscribe for more stories about the stars whose strength was tested far from the spotlight. That steadiness had a birthplace. It was shaped in Pass Christian, Mississippi, inside a family that treated service, faith, and responsibility as part of everyday life. Robin Roberts was born in Tuskegee, Alabama on November 23, 1960, and raised in Pass Christian, Mississippi, in a family where service, education, faith, and personal responsibility were treated as expectations rather than abstractions. Her father, Lawrence E. Roberts, had served as a Tuskegee Airman and later as an Air Force officer, carrying into family life the discipline of a man whose generation had been asked to serve a country that did not always treat Black Americans with equal dignity. His example gave Robin an early understanding of duty. Preparation mattered, promises mattered, and character had to survive pressure. Her mother, Lucimarian Tolliver Roberts, brought a different but equally important authority. An educator and woman of deep faith, she helped shape a household in which achievement was encouraged but never allowed to replace humility, accountability, or care for other people. Robin was the youngest of 4 children, growing up beside siblings who would build accomplished lives of their own, including Sally Ann Roberts, who later became a journalist. By the time Robin learned how to speak to millions, the values behind that voice had already been taking shape at home. Sports gave Robin another language for those lessons. She played basketball and other games from an early age, learning that effort did not guarantee victory and that disappointment still required a return to practice. Basketball in particular taught her timing, balance, endurance, and the ability to recover after a mistake without allowing the mistake to control the next possession. Those habits would follow her long after the court disappeared from daily life. The broadcaster viewers later described as calm had spent years learning that composure was something practiced rather than magically possessed. Family reinforced the same idea in a different form. Lucimarian often reminded her children that everybody's got something, a phrase Robin would carry into adulthood and eventually use as the title of her memoir. As a child, Robin could not have known how much meaning those words would accumulate. They would later sit beside cancer, grief, transplantation, caregiving, and recovery. In Mississippi, they were simply part of a family philosophy. Hardship was not unique to one person, and knowing that should make a person more compassionate rather than more self-important. That combination, her father's discipline, her mother's faith, the expectations of a close family, and the lessons of competition, helped form the quality America would later recognize as steadiness. Robin's warmth did not develop because life had protected her from pressure. It developed alongside standards, responsibility, and the expectation that difficult moments still required dignity. Pass Christian gave her a foundation before television gave her visibility. She learned to prepare, to recover, to listen, and to understand that personal success carried obligations beyond the self. Those lessons would eventually travel with her from basketball courts to local newsrooms, from ESPN to Good Morning America, and later into hospital rooms where discipline alone would no longer be enough. The calm voice millions came to trust had roots far earlier than television. It belonged first to a daughter raised by 2 parents who had taught her in different ways that strength mattered most when it could be used in service of someone else. The ball struck the floor before the cameras ever found her. At Southeastern Louisiana University, Robin Roberts was not rehearsing for fame. She was learning the physical language of pressure. She graduated in 1983, but long before the diploma, her education had already been happening in the space between exhaustion and another drill. The gym had its own weather, the squeak of sneakers, the sharp breath after a sprint, the bruised silence after a difficult game, the small private promise made while lacing up the same shoes again. Wearing number 21, she became a standout on the basketball court, scoring more than 1,000 points and building a college record remembered with pride. Yet the deeper inheritance from those years was less visible than a number on a page. Basketball taught her how to move through contact. It taught her that composure was not calm because life was easy. It was calm because panic wasted energy. Every practice, every road game, every missed shot placed another layer beneath the woman who would later sit before a camera with the kind of stillness people mistook for natural confidence. The locker room did not care about charm. The scoreboard did not respond to excuses. The court asked for the same thing each time: return, adjust, begin again. Years later, when her jersey and basketball accomplishments were honored, the numbers could summarize the record, but they could not fully contain the young woman who learned to accept contact without losing balance. After college, the bright national desk was still far away. Robin entered local television, where careers were built in smaller rooms under harder conditions than audiences ever saw. At stations like WDAM, WLOX, and WSMV, the work did not arrive polished. It came through phone calls, tapes, handwritten notes, box scores, late edits, and the steady pressure of airtime. A young black woman covering sports had to know the game so well that her knowledge could not be easily dismissed. She prepared because preparation was protection. She read, rewrote, checked names, watched highlights on small monitors, and learned how to hold her expression steady when the studio was thin, the staff was limited, and the margin for error felt narrow. There was no grand entrance in those years. There was a desk with papers spread across it, a camera waiting with no sympathy for nerves, a deadline that did not pause for insecurity, and a woman teaching herself how to be ready before anyone decided she belonged. The stations were smaller than the national rooms she would later enter, but the demands were intimate and relentless. A wrong name, a missed score, a flat delivery, a late tape. Each small mistake could follow a young reporter home after midnight. The public would later see Robin Roberts as if she had always been meant for the anchor chair, as if warmth and authority had simply arrived with her. Those early newsrooms tell a quieter story. Confidence was not given to her. It was assembled, piece by piece, broadcast by broadcast. In the hum of local stations, beside stacks of notes and old tapes, she learned to speak clearly when the room offered no applause. She learned that a voice could be trusted only after it had been tested. The basketball court had taught her to recover from a miss. Local news taught her to recover on air in real time, with the red light on and no place to hide. By the time larger doors began to open, Robin was no longer chasing a chance to be noticed. She was carrying years of work that had made her difficult to overlook. The studio at ESPN had its own pulse after dark, monitors glowing with games from across the country, editors moving against deadlines, producers counting down to air, and Robin Roberts wearing a headset as if the noise around her had already been sorted into order. When she joined ESPN in 1990, she entered a world where sports television moved fast, judged quickly, and often left little space for hesitation. For 15 years, Robin built a national presence through SportsCenter and major sports coverage, carrying the instincts of an athlete into the voice of a broadcaster. She knew what pressure looked like because she had felt it in her body long before she described it on television. She understood the face of a player after a loss, the careful pride of a coach, the strange loneliness that can follow both victory and defeat. That understanding made her different. She was not simply reading scores. She was translating the emotional weather of competition for viewers who trusted her to be clear, fair, and steady. In those late hours, a highlight could be more than a highlight. It could be a career saved, a dream interrupted, a city briefly lifted by a team it loved. In a field where a woman's authority could be tested before her first sentence was finished, Robin made preparation sound effortless. ESPN sharpened Robin's voice, but morning television widened its reach. As her work expanded toward Good Morning America, the frame around her changed. The screen was no longer only about games, rankings, highlights, and post-game reaction. It became breakfast tables, living rooms, kitchen counters, and people half awake while the country began another day. By 2005, when Robin became co-anchor of Good Morning America, her presence had taken on a different kind of intimacy. Viewers did not just watch her, they built her into their routine. She was there with the first cup of coffee, with weather updates, breaking news, interviews, grief, celebration, and the ordinary comfort of a familiar face. The lights came on before sunrise. Cue cards waited. A mug sat nearby. Makeup finished what sleep had not. Then the red light appeared, and Robin gave America the morning in a voice that made even difficult news feel bearable. In homes across the country, older viewers did not need to explain why a familiar morning voice mattered. They knew. A voice like that becomes part of the furniture of a life. It is there while coffee is poured, while medication is counted, while grandchildren pass through the kitchen, while news from far away enters the room and still somehow feels survivable because the person delivering it sounds steady. Behind that, trust was a narrowing private space. Public warmth requires energy. Calm requires management. A morning anchor must arrive before the day has fully opened and offer steadiness to people who may never think about what it costs. Robin became known for grace, but grace is rarely effortless. It is often the surface of discipline, fatigue, and private restraint. The woman America saw on screen seemed available, generous, composed. The woman behind the camera had to protect the parts of her life that still belonged to her. The anchor chair became a symbol of reliability, bright under studio lights, waiting each morning like a promise. For years, Robin kept that promise. Then, the body she had trained through sports, work, travel, and relentless early mornings began to ask for a different kind of attention. The voice that had carried so many mornings would soon have to say something far more difficult than good morning. America had welcomed Robin into its homes, but the hardest rooms ahead would be the ones where no audience could sit with her. In 2007, Robin Roberts was at one of the most visible points of her career when breast cancer entered a life built around discipline, preparation, and showing up on time. She had moved from college basketball to local television, from ESPN to Good Morning America, learning at every stage how to remain composed while pressure gathered around her. A cancer diagnosis followed a different clock. Medical appointments and treatment now existed beside early call times, rehearsals, interviews, and the familiar rhythm of morning television. Robin chose to tell viewers herself. "I have breast cancer," she said plainly. The directness mattered. The woman America trusted to deliver difficult news was suddenly delivering difficult news about her own body. There was no dramatic language in the sentence, and no attempt to make fear more theatrical than it already was. Breast cancer had interrupted the routine of a woman whose career depended on reliability, and the next challenge was no longer simply getting through another broadcast. It was learning how to remain present while treatment, fatigue, uncertainty, and recovery began setting terms of their own. Robin continued working through that period, but continuation did not mean pretending the diagnosis had changed nothing. She had spent years being the steady person in the room. Illness required her to accept that steadiness could also come from other people. Family, colleagues, doctors, and the people closest to her became part of a season in which independence was no longer the only measure of strength. Robin repeatedly returned to one of her mother Lucy Marian's lessons. Make your mess your message. The phrase eventually became part of Robin's own public language because it offered a way to understand suffering without romanticizing it. Pain could remain painful and still become useful. By speaking openly about breast cancer, Robin allowed viewers facing their own diagnoses to see illness attached to a familiar face rather than hidden behind one. The value of that openness did not come from presenting herself as fearless. It came from showing that fear, treatment, work, gratitude, and dependence could exist inside the same life. The broadcaster, who had spent years helping America absorb difficult mornings, was beginning to understand what it meant to let other people help carry one of hers. For a time, breast cancer appeared to be the defining medical crisis of Robin's life. She survived it, returned fully to the work that had made her familiar to millions, and carried forward the lesson that vulnerability did not cancel usefulness. But survival had changed the meaning of showing up. The athlete's instinct had once been to push through contact. Television had taught her to remain composed when the red light came on. Cancer added another form of discipline, listening when the body required attention, accepting help without treating it as defeat, and allowing a private struggle to become public only when doing so could serve someone beyond herself. 5 years later, that lesson would be tested on a far more dangerous scale. In 2012, Robin would receive another diagnosis, myelodysplastic syndrome, and this time, the path through treatment would involve a bone marrow transplant from her sister Sally Ann, while the Roberts family was also confronting the loss of the mother whose words had helped Robin survive the first diagnosis. The hospital room was far from the sound of a mourning audience. In 2012, Robin Roberts was diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome, a serious disease involving the blood and bone marrow, and the woman who had greeted America through years of early light had to step away from the chair that made her feel familiar to millions. The language around her life changed again. Blood counts, bone marrow, a transplant, careful distance, the fragile arithmetic of recovery. At Good Morning America, the anchor desk still carried the shape of her absence, but in the room where Robin waited, there was no performance to give. There were sheets pulled tight, medical masks, softened voices, and the strange quiet that gathers around a person when the body is no longer private in the way it used to be. A cup of water could become important. A visitor's footsteps could become an event. A family photo could hold the room together when words felt too thin. On September 20th, 2012, Robin received a bone marrow transplant from her sister, Sally Ann Roberts. The date belongs to medicine, but it also belongs to family. It marks a day when one sister's body became part of another sister's chance to keep living. For viewers, it was a medical milestone. For the Roberts family, it was bloodline, memory, faith, and sisterhood becoming a form of care that language can barely hold. Sally Ann entered that season with a gift no award could resemble. She was not just a name in a medical story, not merely the matching donor in a line of facts. She was Robin's sister, carrying into the hospital the history of the Roberts family table, the Mississippi childhood, the shared language of parents, faith, and duty. Her stem cells offered Robin a path forward, but even that gift arrived beside a wound that could not be repaired by medicine. Their mother, Lucy Marian Roberts, the woman whose voice had shaped Robin's inner life, was gone during the period when Robin most needed the sound of her. The old phrase, "Everybody's got something," no longer belonged to childhood wisdom. It sat beside the bed with a heavier breath. A photograph could hold Lucy Marian's face, but it could not answer back. The phone could still be held in a hand, but the old certainty of calling Mama had changed forever. A memory could replay her warmth, but it could not reach across the room and take her daughter's hand. Robin had become one of the most trusted women on American television, yet in that silence she was still someone's child, facing a frightening medical passage without the mother who had taught her how to endure. When Robin returned to Good Morning America on February 20th, 2013, the words carried more than professional polish. She said, "I have been waiting 174 days to say this. Good morning, America." The studio lights were familiar. The chair was familiar. The faces around her were familiar. But the woman walking back into that space had crossed through rooms the audience could only partly imagine. A sister's love had moved through her blood. A mother's absence had settled into the places where comfort used to be. The applause, the relief, the public celebration could not make the hospital vanish. It could not bring back the voice she missed. It could not turn survival into a clean ending. Still, Robin sat before America again, steady enough to speak, changed enough that every word seemed to come from deeper ground. Her return did not close the wound. It proved that a person can carry the wound back into the light and keep speaking anyway. For the viewers at home, it was a return. For Robin, it was also a crossing. From the bed back to the chair, from waiting back to speaking, from being missed by America to quietly missing the one voice she could no longer call. Robin Roberts and Amber Lane began their relationship in 2005 after being introduced on a blind date, long before the public understood how central Amber would become to Robin's private life. Robin was already building one of the most visible careers in American television, while their relationship developed largely away from that attention. 2 years later, Robin was diagnosed with breast cancer. The timing gave the relationship an early test neither woman could have expected. Robin would later speak about Amber's decision to remain beside her with striking directness. She could have bailed early on in the relationship. No one would have blamed her. Amber stayed. That fact carries more weight than any romantic description could. Their bond was being tested while it was still relatively young, and illness quickly made clear whether the relationship would survive when life became more complicated than work schedules, travel, and privacy. Robin had spent years presenting steadiness to millions of viewers. With Amber, she also had someone who could see the uncertainty behind that public composure and remain when there was nothing to perform. In 2013, Robin publicly thanked Amber and referred to her as her longtime girlfriend, allowing the public to see a relationship that had already endured many private years. The acknowledgement was brief, but it placed Amber inside a story viewers had mostly understood as Robin's alone. Then, in 2022, the direction of care changed. Amber was diagnosed with breast cancer, and Robin found herself beside someone she loved as that person entered a medical journey Robin knew from experience. She understood the fear surrounding diagnosis, the demands of treatment, and the way illness can reorganize ordinary life. This time, she was not the patient. She was the partner, watching, supporting, and waiting while Amber underwent surgery and chemotherapy. Amber later reflected on the unusual symmetry of their relationship. Each woman had experienced serious illness, and each had learned what it meant to care for the other. That reversal gave their history a depth no public photograph could fully explain. Robin had once accepted care from Amber during one of the most frightening periods of her own life. Years later, she had the chance to return that presence. When Robin and Amber married on September 8, 2023, after 18 years together, the wedding represented more than the formal recognition of a long relationship. It came after years in which their partnership had already survived illness, public attention, changing careers, privacy, and the difficult exchange between giving care and receiving it. The backyard ceremony was intimate rather than theatrical, fitting for a relationship that had been built mostly outside the spectacle surrounding Robin's public life. By then, viewers could see the arc more clearly. Amber had been present long before the wedding, long before the public acknowledgement, and long before the world celebrated their marriage. She had remained through Robin's breast cancer and later health crises. Robin had remained through Amber's own cancer treatment. Their wedding did not turn hardship into a romantic lesson or suggest that suffering had been necessary to prove their love. It simply made visible a commitment that had already survived years of uncertainty. For a woman America had learned to trust as a source of comfort, Amber represented something equally important, a person Robin could lean on when steadiness no longer had to be performed. After Robin Roberts shared her health journey publicly, the story moved beyond the private experience of one television anchor. Her breast cancer diagnosis, her later myelodysplastic syndrome, and the bone marrow transplant she received from her sister Sally Ann gave viewers a highly visible example of what serious illness could look like without reducing the person living through it to a diagnosis. Robin's openness brought attention to donor registries, bone marrow matching, and the thousands of patients waiting for compatible donors. The connection was personal. Her own survival had depended on a match within her family, and she understood that many patients did not have that option. By discussing her treatment and recovery on national television, Robin used a platform built through decades of broadcasting to direct attention toward people whose names viewers would never know. The woman who had spent years delivering other people's stories had become part of a public conversation about illness, donation, survival, and the fear of waiting for medical news that might determine whether another year was possible. Recognition followed. Robin received honors including the Arthur Ashe Courage Award, and viewers repeatedly told her that her openness had helped them face their own diagnoses or support someone they loved. Those tributes reflected something real. People had seen Robin return to television after cancer, MDS, a transplant, and months away from the anchor desk, and that return had become meaningful beyond her own career. But public courage can create an unusual responsibility. Once a person becomes an example of hope, audiences can begin to see the example before they see the person. Robin's value did not come from appearing fearless or from turning survival into a perfect story. It came from speaking honestly enough for other people to recognize themselves in the uncertainty. She could be grateful for survival and still remember what treatment had cost. She could encourage another patient without pretending that every frightening day had contained a lesson. The credibility of her message came from that balance. Optimism without denying fear, gratitude without denying loss, and purpose without pretending pain had been necessary. That balance became one of the central features of Robin's later public life. She continued to work, advocate, speak about donor awareness, and use her experience to give difficult medical subjects a human face. Yet the deeper meaning of her story remained more personal than any award could express. Robin had spent years helping Americans begin the day with a calm voice and a sense that difficult news could be faced. Illness reversed that relationship for a time. She became the person who needed doctors, family, her sister, Amber, and others to help carry what she could not carry alone. When she returned, the steadiness viewers recognized had changed. It was no longer only professional composure. It carried the knowledge of dependence, loss, recovery, and gratitude. That is why the question beneath her public image remains so powerful. Who supports the person everyone else has learned to lean on? Robin's life offers no single answer. Sally Ann did, Amber did, her family did, and in later years, Robin used what she had received from them to offer something back to people she would never meet. After returning to the life America recognized, Robin Roberts did not treat survival as a chapter that could simply be closed. She carried what had happened into writing, advocacy, and later into production. Her memoir, Everybody's Got Something, drew its title from one of the phrases most closely associated with her mother, Lucy Marion Roberts. The words had followed Robin through breast cancer, myelodysplastic syndrome, a bone marrow transplant, recovery, and grief. On the page, they became less a slogan than a way of understanding the lives of people who appear strong while carrying struggles others may never see. Robin has often spoken about optimism and gratitude, but her version of optimism has never depended on pretending that pain was small. It has depended on acknowledging difficulty and still deciding what can be done with the life that remains. Writing gave her a way to place that experience into a form other people could recognize without asking them to imitate her strength. Her advocacy around donor awareness grew directly from that experience. Robin's own transplant depended on the extraordinary fact that her sister Sally Ann was able to become her donor. She understood that many patients wait without knowing whether a compatible match will appear. By speaking publicly about her diagnosis, transplant, and recovery, Robin helped direct attention toward donor registries and the human lives behind them. Her work also expanded beyond the anchor desk. Through Rockin' Robin Productions, she moved further into producing and developing stories, using the credibility built over decades in broadcasting to help other people become the center of the narrative. That shift mattered. Robin had spent much of her career being the trusted face delivering a story. Production allowed her to influence which stories were told, how they were framed, and whether hardship was reduced to spectacle or allowed to retain complexity and dignity. By 2026, Robin no longer needed to prove that she belonged in American television. Her career had already crossed sports broadcasting, morning news, authorship, advocacy, and production. The more meaningful continuity was the way she kept turning personal experience outward without pretending that usefulness erased loss. A book could not restore her mother's voice. Advocacy could not undo the months spent facing a life-threatening illness. Production could not make the hospital years disappear. But each gave Robin another way to decide what those experiences would become after survival. She continued to work, interview, produce, and support stories beyond her own. The woman once known mainly for delivering the morning news had become something broader. A broadcaster who understood the responsibility of visibility, a survivor who knew the value of being helped, and a producer increasingly interested in giving other people's lives room to be heard on their own terms. At 65, Robin Roberts remains one of the most familiar figures in American morning television, carrying a career that has stretched from college athletics and sports broadcasting to Good Morning America, authorship, advocacy, and production. The public still recognizes the qualities that made her trusted in the first place: preparation, warmth, restraint, and the ability to deliver difficult information without making the audience feel abandoned inside it. But the woman behind that familiar presence has changed profoundly. She has lived through breast cancer, myelodysplastic syndrome, a bone marrow transplant, the death of her mother, and the years in which Amber Lane's companionship moved from supporting Robin through illness to receiving Robin's care during Amber's own breast cancer treatment. Their 2023 marriage placed a public marker on a relationship that had already endured 18 years of private history. Robin's steadiness now carries knowledge that was not there when she first entered national television. The knowledge that strength can include dependence, that survival does not erase grief, and that the person comforting others may also need someone to lean on. Her legacy is difficult to reduce to one achievement because its meaning lies in the crossings between them. Basketball taught Robin to recover after contact. Sports television taught her to perform under pressure. Morning news made her part of the daily lives of millions. Illness forced her to accept care. Her sister's donation showed her what another person could literally give to keep a life moving forward. Amber showed what long-term presence could look like when the public attention disappeared. Robin, in turn, used her visibility to speak about donor awareness, health, gratitude, and the responsibilities that come with being treated as a symbol of courage. For older viewers especially, that history carries another layer. Many of them did not simply watch Robin's career, they aged alongside it. Her voice remained familiar while their own lives accumulated doctor visits, bereavements, marriages, caregiving, grandchildren, recoveries, and second chances. That shared passage of time may explain why her presence has meant more than professional longevity. Robin Roberts' story does not need a perfect final image. Too much of her life argues against perfect endings. Cancer was followed by another life-threatening diagnosis. Survival was followed by grief. The woman who received care later became a caregiver. A private relationship eventually became a marriage celebrated in public, but only after nearly 2 decades of living the commitment first. Through each change, Robin kept returning to work, to storytelling, to family, and and to the belief that difficulty could be acknowledged without being allowed to define the entire life. Millions of viewers have heard her say, "Good morning," across the years. After everything that has happened behind those words, the greeting carries more than routine. It belongs to a woman who has repeatedly had to begin again herself, not untouched, not unchanged, still here. If Robin Roberts' voice ever made one of your mornings feel a little less lonely, leave a quiet tribute below. Share this story with someone who still believes in courage that does not need to shout, and subscribe for more stories about the complicated human lives behind familiar faces.